We're in the we're in the Empire Strikes Back part of the story.
Very much.
You were just telling me though that the weather's nicer this year. You were thinking about how that affects the front lines.
Yeah. Yeah, because also I'm wondering, like, without the moisture, like I don't really know what I have to. I get different messages from friends of mine, but I remember 3 years ago talking about tanks being bogged down in mud, or you might remember videos of literally they'd pull out in freezing temperatures, pull a BNP out, or and it come out, all this water would be coming out of there, all nearly frozen, and everyone's going about their business, still getting it, but it is obviously a very big part of the winter fight. And this year's a little different. It's just like I said, it's hovering above zero, and that it's not loading a lot of moisture all over the place. It's not overly raining. It's not overly snowing. It's very interesting to see how things are going. But we've had 3 days of no attacks as well, which is kind of where everyone's like, why?
That's what I was going to ask you next is what's it like being in Kyiv now with that increase in missile attacks?
um, well, the missile part, like 70 missiles on Christmas. I've been watching this for a while about the frequency pattern between the nightly drone swarm that they always seem to send, which they send roughly between, on the low end, 35, on the high end 135, but they don't always accompany it with missiles. That's usually 4 to 5 day waits in between each swath of drones. And I think a lot of that's to exhaust air defense and keep Ukrainian forces running around trying to interpret where things will come and go next. And then about every fourth, fifth day will be an additional 20, 30, or up to 100 missiles on top. And I've also noticed that they're increasingly trying to hit a lot more places west. And I've even asked Yuri Ignat, who's the spokesperson for the Air Force, a few different times, but I've started trying to learn from how he answers these things. He says, don't think of it that way. It's very dangerous to think of it as, why are they not hitting Kiev? Is it because we have stronger air defense? And so therefore hit softer targets, hit electrical grid targets in other parts of the country that may not have overlapping air defense like you would have here? It's hard to tell, but I do know this: Russians are doing it to keep Ukrainians very busy and
Have you
exhaust the supply of the defense missiles and such that are used to take down drones and take down the missiles, so that they can hopefully wear that down.
Yeah, I mean, from their perspective, drones are probably the way to go since they're running out of manpower. I mean, they're importing soldiers from North Korea. Have you seen
Mm-hmm.
these drones?
The Shaheds.
Yeah, have you seen it like
Oh yeah,
one like up close, like one that was knocked down or taken
both,
down?
both. I've seen them in the air. I've seen them evolve from the what I call computer slate gray to the first time I noticed a carbon black one on a Saturday morning. Literally, it was about 9 o'clock, so we had enough light in the sky. I think it was September 2023, like the end of September. I was out here one morning and I looked over, and you could hear them. This is why we call them mopeds, right? You can hear them moving, and it's just kind of, oh. Now it was like, that one's black. Like, you start getting so used to them, you start going, oh, there's something different about this one, right? So on the ground, yes, you see them. And let me explain to how viewers should you see this: is that investigators come after an attack and they pick apart everything that's going on, and they're looking for shrapnel, missiles and drones and parts. And so often, especially with journalists there with cameras running, etc., they're very particular to come out and say, here's this part. And they'll, as they come out of the rubble, they'll go over, and there'll be one area where all of that material will be put together. And I have photos of, I don't know if they're really serial numbers, but part numbers that are in the items that are in front of us. And then the various experts, both here in Ukraine and friends of mine who do this professionally, they can look at those and they can tell you down to, well, this is a new release of this part because this number comes from this stack. And it's amazing to watch these things evolve. And the first drone attack I remember specifically with Shaheds was October 17th, 2022, when they hit a 5-story, very old, century-old building with families in it near the train station here in Kyiv. And you may remember that that season started a few days before on October 10th with a missile attack, right? In many parts of the city, no less. But I don't remember any drones being mentioned. Nothing, certainly like Shaheds. But after October 10th, it was a regular part of what they did. And then in the second wave that they did of that from May 2023 on, you started seeing it becoming standard operating procedure for Russians.
How big are these things?
The drones are 8 feet by 11 feet. You know, like they're not huge, but they're
What do
they're
they
not.
look like? Do they look like a plane? Are they
They
propeller driven?
remind me of not what like a manta ray, but the shape is like this in
Like a
some capacity.
triangle?
Yeah,
Okay.
and
What are they carrying?
with a rounded front end nose that's almost basically projectile looking.
And do they fire things, or are they a
Mm.
missile themselves? Like it's
They
supposed
are
to hit something?
yeah, they're a loitering munition. They're basically designed to explode upon impact. They're also sort of dummy devices, meaning that they're not transmitting back and forth to get new information. Like this isn't something I knew about them at first when they were being used. I was thinking, are they relaying information back about how the air defense is responding in any capacity? Because I know how drones could be built theoretically. I know what they could hold, especially with some American drones. But no, they didn't. Apparently, I've been told many times, and even recently with the weather changes coming in, the AFU very clearly mentioned that these are pre-programmed, 2 weeks in advance. So whenever you see them moving around, like if you see one that goes to Vinnytsia and one goes to Ivano-Frankivsk, it's programmed in to do that. It's programmed in to do that in a way that they have already decided that campaign before that particular date. So today being December 29th, they don't decide today I want to hit Rivna, here, let me do something. It takes a little bit of the delay of that. So that's important to understand, because when we think about what are they trying to learn, they don't really learn anything from these particular gadgets necessarily.
So the drones aren't transmitting. In other words, so this tech stuff might be way above my head.
That's
All
okay.
right.
It's a little bit above my head. I just happen to deal with this, but yeah.
But it sounds like you're saying they program the route so that there's nothing that has to transmit to the drone. They just let it go and it does its thing
Correct.
on its own.
Now, we know there are some examples where they've tried to use local cell towers to transmit with cell modems and cameras, and even evidence of incorporating Starlink, but at this time it isn't a standard part of the machines. Instead, we have seen modifications to improve how drones receive the data via satellites.
Which Ukrainians are doing that too. Ukrainians are doing a similar situation like that, where they're pre-programming 2 destinations, and they, once it's thrown into loft, it doesn't, there's not some way that they're controlling it after that. It's pre-programmed, I'm sure. There may be some variations. One variation they're working on right now, you may have heard about, is a tether, this kind of optical line that they use. There's different ways they're trying to test ways to control the drones further and further and further into uncontrollable territory, per se, right? Hostile enemy territory. Yeah. But it's still ultimately you're sending something off with a pre-programmed request to hit a very specific location you've been monitoring for some while.
So let me ask you this: if they catch them, let's say air defense catches one of these things in the sky, is the goal to blow it up while it's airborne?
I think the first goal has been, and I think they've been very good at this, using various parts of electronic warfare to jam them and get them to just basically disappear off into the fields, to then go find them. Because you may notice, if you ever think of the little placards you see posted online from AFU of, last night there were this many shot down. Well, that isn't how many were lobbed, how many were deployed, right? You have to really look into the AFU daily reports like I do to see, 75 were sent, we shot down 50. Well, then what happened to those other 20? Well, if they didn't impact something, and you would hear about that, they hit electronic jamming, and they just fall out of the sky essentially into fields. I don't mean like straight down, but they just they go off into a field, and I have a little batch of photos from that I collect from various AFU accounts where, look, hey, we've got out here in the field, and there's one of these Shahed. And then what they'll do is, sometimes they're damaged, but they'll go pick it apart. And here in Kyiv, there's a couple places you can go to and see, one of these items that's been retrieved. But they'll pick them apart, and they're going to put them as part of a prosecution, no less. And that's That's another thing when I say they pick out the shrapnel of an event, of an attack, is that you almost always have a war crimes prosecutor there as part of that process. It's kind of surreal as an American. Yeah.
For chain of custody to figure out. So that's what I was going to ask you. Did you hear any reports about where they're getting these parts? Are there any Western parts in these things?
Yeah. Dual purpose parts have been discussed for a while, especially when we're talking about sanctions. And I think that the problem we're going to have is that I think we're always going to have a search for dual purpose parts, things that leave a factory that's designed to, I don't know, run a basic GPS type of, module that the maker doesn't think about, like Russia could use this or Iran could use this. I'm just making a GPS system. It depends on what the parts are. There are some parts that when they show up in these gadgets, as you know, both Ukraine and allies will go really crazy about one detecting part in it that comes from the West. Why isn't the West doing everything about this part? Well, I don't think that's the way that's going to solve it, simply because they'll just adapt to the other part. And we're sort of doing the same thing collectively, meaning I have friends that make drones. And one of the things they do, since it's hard to get the parts, is they basically travel into Europe and they order these little servos that they know are available still. And then when those stop being available, they'll switch to another servo that they'll just buy as many as they can, come back in here and keep building. Because you're going to adapt to what you can get, not what you're, unable to retrieve, especially since China makes all of these little things that are tiny gadgets that, again, can be used for any kind of non-warfare part. And if you've ever seen what the FPV drone market here is for people who literally just are constantly creating them from scratch, 3D printers, etc., these parts are something that, Americans would know this. I come from the days of Radio Shack, where I could go down there and buy little things and just start wiring stuff. And that's what we have here. We just happen to have amazing engineering minds that are going to find every available thing. And Ukrainians, I've seen some of the most amazing moments where it's like MacGyvers, like everyone's a MacGyver here. Everyone has this ability, like, hold on, wait, it's a piece of copper, hold on. And they start doing something. Next thing you know, they got the engine working again. I did not know they could do that. So if you do that with an Abrams tank, and you do that with, a Bradley, vehicle or something as well, give it to a Ukrainian. They're going to adapt it.
Yeah, there are computers in home appliances now. So, I mean, you can probably source things from anywhere.
Yeah. And actually, I would say that there are times where I watch people create Frankenstein machines, things that don't make sense sort of at first until you see it done. And in fact, I was reading about new missiles that will be coming here. Greece is about to send us, I think it's Greece is about to send us some missiles. They're for the Frankensam. And a Frankensam, for the listeners who don't know that, is a S-300, but with Western missiles. So they have basically taken a system that's designed to fire one type of missile and re-rigged it a little bit to fire stuff that can be replenished from the West. These are the adaptations that are required to survive.
Yeah, at a certain point, Ukraine has to start thinking about making its own stuff too, and I'm sure they're doing that.
Yes. Some Ukrainians, well, Ukrainians are going to know this better than others, but Americans don't know that in 2010, this was the number one. This was one of the largest exporters of weapons to the rest of the world. And
wait a second. In 2010, Ukraine was one of the biggest exporters of weapons to the West. That's what you're saying?
To the world.
To the world.
To the world. It was a massive, massive outsource, right? It was actually written about many times. And then a combination of, and I always try to put it where it belongs. It's a combination of Yanukovych stealing and destroying Ukraine internally, right? Stealing out the Eastern manufacturing facilities and basically sell it off, but also the Western naivete, the hopey-changey era of post-Iraq war invasion of let's try to get along, and we had it was Sam Nunn and Richard Lugar. So if you remember those, right, they had been doing that since the 90s, since the early 90s, right? And Sam Nunn's, those guys in the Senate who were trying to always remove, old shells, right? So Obama comes along in 2008 and goes as a junior senator on one of those trips here. Go, oh look, we have all these ancient shells. These got to go. And it's like, yes, we're going to do this, and everyone's high fiving, not thinking of the future. But
Yeah.
but inside there was the corruption of Yanukovych, who specifically gutted the weapons industry. So what are we seeing now? We're seeing a strong need to rebuild the weapons industry internally, while knowing that there's very few places in this country you can hide anything to start doing such a thing. But yet it is happening. So
Yeah,
you're already hearing about,
rebuilding weapons manufacturing while you have bombs dropping on your head.
it's a little bit difficult.
Yeah, I mean, Joe Biden's right. He's the first administration to not try to make friends with the Russians before it falls apart, since the fall of the Soviet Union. And then, you know, I don't know, Trump's going to come in and Lord knows what he's going to do. It's going to make it, I don't even want to predict. But yeah, that was the naivete of Obama, right, with the foreign policy.
Sure. And I think that's important because it's easy, and I talk to a lot of Ukrainians, so there's this feeling about Obama. It's a very intense feeling, you know. But I think I always explain to Ukrainians that I talk to here, you just have to add in these other flavors. In other words, you have to add in Sam Nunn and Richard Lugar. You have to see that it wasn't just a person like Obama who came and said, it was like this pattern of thinking that really reduced Ukraine as a secondary figure on the stage to Russia, obviously,
right,
because we're trying to do this. So Russia, we're not going to take any of their nukes away, but hey, Ukraine, if you could do us a favor and kind of get rid of yours, then we'll come back to you. And then, of course, we did. And it may have felt good. I try to pay good witness to the historical videos I watch of that era. Like I watched an actual press conference with Hillary Clinton and Yanukovych from some part of 2010, and I'm just sitting there going, "Wow, I can't believe I'm about to watch this." But okay,
well,
and no
one thought Putin was such a monster, and they all expect like, oh, we're just going to sell them blue jeans, and they're going to be cool, and we're going to open up the markets, our markets, to them, and they're going to say, oh, this is wonderful. We're going to start being normal. But this whole time I mean, George Bush is enticing Ukraine, or George Bush W. Bush is enticing Ukraine with NATO, and then they're saying, well, we don't really mean it, and making Ukraine play second fiddle, and the whole time they keep trying to court Russia, and this entire time, from the invasion of Georgia to that, before that speech in Munich, the whole time Putin's been telling us, hey, guess what, I'm gonna take these places back, or I'm gonna give it a try, and nobody listened.
I think also here's an interesting thing I've tried to really, I don't know, put my head around. What is an American president to do between 2010 and 2014 if a president of this country is saying, I want to do all of the following? And we have hindsight now to look at Yanukovych, but if you're a president at the time and the leader of a country says, I want to do all the following, you're going to say, no, you can't do any of that. You can't destroy your weapons industry. You can't get rid of shells, because in the future, you're going to be deposed and you're going to sell out to Russia. And statecraft doesn't work like that. We kind of go with every country based on what they are doing in their moment, right? And that's the really hard part, because supporters, like I'm an American Texan living here in Ukraine for 3 years. We want to look back at history and say, well, but at this time, I wish this had happened, or why not NATO at this time? All these things, but there were all these problems along the way that aren't just a one-sided problem. It's not like, well, what Ukraine didn't do or what America didn't do. It's also that we're asking historically to try to understand something you can't understand in the moment. Because I can't imagine going up to a country that's saying, yeah, we're okay with getting rid of this, and go, no. We don't really do that very often. We don't go up to a country and says, yeah, you don't want to be you don't want to have a storage facility of aging artillery shells. Yeah, but you have to. We're not going to do that. So the reason why I think that's important is that our modern way of discussing this, with a lot of pain, a lot of anger, aggravation, and deep frustration, that I also feel, by the way, that we have to be accurate to how those things are. That way we walk out with a reasonable view, so that we get to what we want, not what we didn't have. And when I talk, especially locally, it's really wonderful to talk locally, because I live at the cafe and I get to talk to my Ukrainian neighbors, is to say, where was the magic window when NATO was the option? Right.
Yeah.
No one has a magic time because it only exists between 2005 and 2010. And then it really didn't exist after that, because once the conflict was already low, what's called low intensity conflict on the ground, you can't join NATO. So there was really no period except that brief period between 2005 and 2010 with Yushchenko, right? The only time really was that brief window, because before that, Kuchma and like there were discussions of NATO in the early 2000s, but there was, if you remember, there was a little tension over selling weapon systems to Saddam. If you don't know that, let's just say there was a little tension over selling some weapon systems to Saddam. So why did Ukraine send troops to deal with or to help in Iraq? A little bit to offset that. Like, oh, sorry, we didn't mean to deal with Saddam, so hey, we'll send some troops. Now that wasn't my first view. My first view was fairly naive and idealistic. Like, hey, but Ukraine sent troops to back us up in Iraq, so therefore, and then some wiser figures here said, well, I mean, yes, but we also were trying to make up for some difficult decisions, in the last administration before Yushchenko. And see, I didn't understand these things coming here. Not those parts. I understood an American view of Iraq. I understood an American view of a coalition. But I've since then learned a lot more about what the Ukrainian side of it was. And I think that reason why I think that's important is that then we have to look at how do we get where we want, though. If we look at what we didn't get done, there's nothing we're going to get out of that. But for instance, I've said we have, like, right now we're the 29th, we have less than 20 days where Joe Biden right now could decide right now, just like Ronald Reagan did, just like Trump has done, just like other presidents have done, to give major non-NATO ally status to Ukraine. It doesn't require an act of Congress. It's just a fiat. In 1987, that's exactly what Ronald Reagan did with both Egypt and Israel at the same time. And both of them had, like in the case, I'll just deal with Israel. Israel had a memo of understanding in 75. You know about memos. In fact, Israel told Zelensky 3 years ago, yeah, the memo thing doesn't work. Security agreement, first one happens in 81, the next one happens in 83, but then major non-NATO ally status is bestowed in 87. It doesn't require the Article 5, but it really changes a lot of the ways in which the weapons industry here, intelligence, and all sorts of things happen that, again, just a signature could happen. So, Mr. Biden, you need to really do that. I don't think Mr. Trump will do that.
Well, I guess that's going to be the call coming from Ukrainian Americans at this point. Get Biden to sign that before he goes. Hey, Chris.
Yeah, major non-NATO status would really be at least a big change in there, because what we don't have is an alliance. And a lot of my supporter friends for the first 2 years would just lose it. I know I would feel the same way. Well, they're not an ally. How could you say they're not an ally? Well, because legally, that's actually true. Legally, it's true. There is no alliance. There are security agreements. There's been all of this that's happened. And I think when I've talked to you on the phone, I've said, despite our aggravation of things that did not happen the way we wanted for the last 3 years, without that alliance, there still is a 54, I'm gonna get realistic about the number, it's about 30 country alliance anyway. Even without those alliances existing on paper and mere security agreements, there's still roughly 30 countries that without them, we'd be gone. We would be overwhelmed by now. It would have been over by now. So that's a blessing. It's lovable. And we build upon that. Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, man, thanks for the discussion. I really appreciate it. We're going to keep this going. I know
You're one of my favorite people, bro. You really helped me think about what this is about. I really do wake up and think about not just the situation, but I try to think of different perspectives to get out of mine,
Yeah.
So I know when I watch your interviews and I think about these various conversations, they fuse into the work that happens. And I think that they're a part of, especially for Westerners, I think that I would strongly invite to listen to a lot of Ukrainian perspectives and make sure that if you can't live here, it's maybe a little bit more difficult. But there are ways that the discussions of escalation or reasonable measures happen, that the more you do this and you live around, you come up with just a very natural way of answering these questions. So it's always great to talk to you, and we have a lot to do for 2025.
Well, I really appreciate you saying that, and I really appreciate you as well. And I did want to say, you're just talking about Americans moving to Ukraine. I had this vision of a real estate agent advertising that,
Yeah.
and what would be the pitch? Actually, let me ask you, what would be the pitch for an American to move to Ukraine?
Great potential. Actually, the potential is if you're an entrepreneurial thinker and you believe in other entrepreneurs, and you're a person that's got capital, or at least like I don't have capital in my bank, you know this. I have intellectual capital. I'm a creator. I'm a combination of creation, and I really get along with the fact that here that energy is very strong. So that would be my first pitch. If you're someone who really entrepreneurial spirit, and not just about business, but all sorts of level of creativity, this country is on fire for that. And it's something that has been a major inspiration for the last 3 years, is to keep seeing young people who in the middle of war will start a small business, who will reinvent the situation over and over again. As something crumbles, another thing creates. And it's something that I think that people who believe in, like I said, the entrepreneurial way. I'm a business owner for 25 years. I see it all the time. I see types of these things. They may fail a little bit, but they keep doing it, and it's always a good energy for it. The cost of living is extremely reasonable for an American. It is getting, you can feel it. Inflation of prices hits, so there are things that I go down. Go, oh no, I those are dollar. It's a whole thing. Not today. I can't afford that. But mostly no. It's something that you can afford if you're a Western. You can probably come here if you bring outside income in. You can benefit to the country. Like I'm a web designer, multimedia creator. So my clients are in the West. I work for free for any Ukrainian here. So I basically bring money in, spend it in the stores, put it in the Ukrainian pocket. That's good for Ukraine, but it's also good for people who are, if you're a business person, if you're a creative person that's trying to get things done, this is the place to be.
All right, that's the pitch. And if a Westerner finds you online, maybe they can send you some questions. All right, Chris.
Questions? I'd be glad to help with that.
Well, thank you. Let's do this again. Let's keep
Будь
doing
ласка,
this.
брат. Ми разом завжди.
All right, Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава і пиздець Російської Федерації.